This video was brought to you by Surfshark VPN. And as I said before, it's important to stay safe out there while browsing the web. It's crazy how most of the time folks are not even aware of the amount of surveillance, limitation, and data mining happening to them on a daily basis, and dealing with that might not be too obvious. That is, unless you use Surfshark VPN's easy one-for-all solution. No matter if you're on Windows, Android, or overly expensive Apple products, with the click of a button, Surfshark turns you into an anonymous and hard-to-track user, giving you more freedom on the internet, keeps you away from prying eyes, and prevents companies from doing dumb things like geo-blocking, where video and streaming services restrict your library simply because of where you live. Either way, Surfshark makes it a non-issue. You start up their service, choose your location, refresh the page, and bam, you're back to watching The Office here in America, and now you can relive Robert California's awesome threat to Andy over the phone.
You don't even know my real name. I'm the Lizard King.
And those that use the link in the description below and enter the special code Johnny will not only get 83% off their initial order, but the next 3 months are also completely free. Thanks to Surfshark VPN for the sponsor. Thank you for helping support this channel. Now let's continue on with the show. Alright, Final Fantasy was enough to save Square from certain doom, and not missing a beat, it was only a year later when they went and produced Final Fantasy II in 1988. And I always found this a bit funny. When we got the first Final Fantasy in 1990, Japan at that point already had the first 3 games under their wing. But as you might know, we here in America wouldn't get the original Final Fantasy II and III until much later. But as to why we didn't see these two at launch is a story that might sound familiar to you. The Super Nintendo was little less than a year from releasing when Final Fantasy I made the rounds here in the States, so Square decided it was all hands on deck for that console's release. Not that there wasn't any plans to give us the original Final Fantasy II, they got as far as a beta localization. They even started advertising it in a few publications. According to Kaoru Moriyama, who also worked on the translation for Final Fantasy IV as well as Secret of Mana, the whole thing was scrapped considering the time it would require giving the English version all the bells and whistles needed for an official release on a console that was on its way out. Square wanted all the attention on Final Fantasy IV, their first entry on the Super Nintendo. As such, the original Final Fantasy II and III would remain Japanese exclusive for the foreseeable future, and I'm guessing these two did well enough in Japan so that Square could afford not to give them international releases. You know, I figured they needed all the money they can get considering how close they were to closing down last time, but I guess that's all in the past now. I contemplated for a bit on which version I would make the basis for this review. While it would make the most sense for me to review the version we got here in America, that is the Final Fantasy Origins Remake, or the PSP version for that matter, I decided, you know what, we live in an age where fan translations are a thing. I have a copy of the original Famicom release, I don't feel too bad about it. I figured it'd be cool to experience Final Fantasy II as it was originally released, warts and all. So I found this one courtesy of Neo Demi Force. The only thing different were a few names, but the basic gist of the story is intact, and I feel that's what really matters. Another perk to playing this on an emulator is that I can fast forward through grind sessions, and we are definitely going to be spending time on that later on. They say the general runtime of this one is about 25 hours. I think I was able to cut that down by 10 hours just from this feature alone. Yeah. My first experience with this one was with the Dawn of Souls release in the Game Boy Advance back when I was in high school. And I know for a fact I didn't finish it, but I couldn't remember why, and I didn't recall anything about that first experience, other than it was the Final Fantasy where you got your ass kicked as soon as the game began. Pulling no punches, Final Fantasy II doesn't give a shit about your feelings. But now I'm going to be finishing the game proper this time, so let's continue with the Final Fantasy Marathon and dive right into the original Final Fantasy II. The Emperor of Polynesia has summoned demons from hell to begin his world conquest, and good lord is this a villain who wastes no time with frivolous bullshit. In no time, along with his warship the Dreadnought, the Emperor lays waste to a few areas across the world, enslaving townspeople to do his bidding and even going as far as poisoning kingdoms that he deems a threat. This guy is a fucking asshole, and now he has his sights on the kingdom of Fynn next. Our 4 protagonists of the story, Firion, Maria, Leon, and Guy, attempt to fend off the Emperor's onslaught, but they are quickly torn asunder and left for dead. But thanks to Princess Hilda and her army of rebels, Firion, Maria, and Guy are given a second chance at life, though the princess refuses to let them join their cause, fearing that they're too young and inexperienced to aid the rebellion. And considering the ass beating you got when the game began, she isn't wrong. But it isn't long before you join the rebellion anyway, because after licking their wounds, the 3 heroes set off to Fynn to search for Leon, who went missing since the initial attack. They don't find Leon, instead they find Princess Hilda's fiancé Scott, who is hanging on death's doorway. Get used to that.
With his dying breath, he warns that nobleman Borgin has betrayed the kingdom and has become a general for the Emperor's army. Scott gives the heroes his ring to give back to Hilda before passing on, and after doing so, the princess is now convinced of the hero's conviction, and the three are officially inducted into the rebellion, ready to do what they can to fend off the Emperor and end his conquest. And they have a lot of work cut out for them. Joined by the princess's right-hand white mage Minwu, and with the occasional help of Sid and his air cab services, the four are first sent to gather Mithril to forge powerful weapons to aid their cause, ending with them freeing the enslaved citizens of Salaman and killing General Borgin, who was placed in charge of the camp but was not very good at his job apparently. Afterwards, they focused their attention on destroying the Dreadnought, the Emperor's gargantuan battleship, guarded by his faithful Dark Knight, whose voice sounds awfully familiar according to Maria. So who is this mysterious warrior, and why is it obviously her brother Leon? Well, we're not going to deal with that plot thread for some time. To destroy the Dreadnought, the gang needs to acquire the Sunflame, something they can use to overload the battleship's engine, but soon after retrieving it, Princess Hilda is captured by the Emperor's forces and locked away in the Dreadnought. A dire situation, but luckily they manage to sneak aboard the ship when it lands for supplies. And by sneak aboard, I mean they give the watchmen a pass like they're a fucking hall monitor, and they're free to explore the battleship like they're just part of the crew. What the fuck? But they manage to rescue the princess, and then use the Sunflame to nuke the engine. The Dreadnought goes kablamo, score one for the rebels. But it's a bittersweet victory, as the King of Fynn soon passes away from his illness. But before dying, he sets up motions for a three-way attack. While the princess attempts to reclaim Fynn from the Emperor, and while Minwu researches how to unlock the ancient magic Ultima to help turn the tide of the war, the other three are sent east to the Kingdom of Dice, where they can hopefully enlist the aid of the mighty Dragoons. Except, oh, all the Dragoons are dead. The Emperor poisoned them some time ago. All that's left is a mother and child and this dragon who tells you to leave this egg into the spring before they die off themselves. Well, with that plan down the shitter for the time, the heroes rejoin the princess back in Rebel HQ, but then things get a little weird when the princess tries hitting on Firion, and it gets to a point where we almost have a fucking sex scene in a Famicom Final Fantasy game. But it turns out the princess is not really the princess at all. It was a Lamia queen in disguise, and I'd still be cool with that. But she's dealt with proper in no time. The real queen was captured again and placed inside this Colosseum near the Palametian Kingdom, where our heroes have to battle against the dreaded Behemoth to reclaim her, which would have been more impactful if I didn't already encounter a Behemoth randomly on my way to the Colosseum. With the princess rescued again and after being broken out of prison thanks to Paul the Ninja here, the princess wants her fucking kingdom back. So they set up camp on the outskirts of Fynn to plan a course of action, and this is a magical fucking campsite. Seriously, this dinky little tent houses this gargantuan throne room. Why don't they just make this tent the new kingdom? Put a few of these next to each other? Who the hell needs a castle? So the rebels manage to retake Fynn, things are slowly looking up for the heroes, but to keep the momentum going, our heroes then make way for Mysidia to help Minwu obtain the powerful spell Ultima. This requires a few trips, going through some dungeons to get these ancient masks and a crystal rod, then they have to go to this old tower and hopefully find the spell there, but then they're suddenly eaten by the Leviathan during the boat ride, and they're stuck there for a bit along with some other unfortunate victims, some who have been there long enough to build tables, chairs, bookshelves. This is the most fucked up food truck I've ever seen in my life. There they also meet with Ricard Highwind, the last of the Dragoons, who joins with our heroes as they reclaim their ship inside the belly of the beast and manage to make a getaway. I can only assume they exited through the Leviathan's anus. At the top of the tower, the gang regroups with Minwu, who then sacrifices himself to unlock the seal to Ultima, the greatest magic known to man that I only used a grand total of once to see what it did, wasn't impressed, and went back to swinging the swords. I'm sorry, Minwu, you died in vain. But holy shit, people are dying all the time in this fucking game. The game begins with you getting your ass kicked. The Emperor at this point has already decimated a few parts of the world before this even happened. Hilda's fiance dies, the king dies, shit, I didn't even mention some other folks like Joseph here. He joins your party in search for the Sunflame early on, seems like a good soul. I can respect the bald man that punches shit to death, but then he just randomly gets smushed by a boulder. Well, that's some bad luck. The Dragoons are dead, this dragon dies. Death follows our heroes worse than it follows Zidane in Final Fantasy IX. And it gets worse because after you manage to retrieve the Ultima spell, the Emperor, in a fit of rage because I guess he really liked that Behemoth, he fucking nukes a whole bunch of towns and civilians with this magical cyclone. And this is a permanent thing. You can't visit these towns anymore. Christ. And the random encounters are also a lot meaner now. No more goblins and plants. It's all sergeants and sorcerers and captains. Enough is enough, however. You reclaimed Fynn, you have Ultima, you have the help of a Dragoon. It's time to take the fight to the Emperor, who you fight inside the magical cyclone. That's a little weird. The Emperor himself, though, kind of a bitch. I was honestly a little shocked by that, considering the damage he did previously. It doesn't take much to finally send him to hell, but it's finally over and everyone is super quick to jump into a celebratory waltz. Like, I didn't even spend any time mourning the loss of their loved ones and other citizens. They went right into a dance. Alas, it is a short-lived victory, as you might expect, because it's Final Fantasy II. The Emperor's Dark Knight has taken the Palametian Kingdom for himself and is declared the new Emperor. But the gang is clearly fed up with this bullshit. They take Sid's airship to the Palametian Kingdom and face off against the Dark Knight, who, yes, is actually Leon. I'm not sure if he was brainwashed or if he was just swayed by the Emperor's gift of the gab? It's not very clear. And also, another ding for the death count because Sid dies before he gives you the airship. He was caught in one of the Cyclone's attacks. I thought Final Fantasy IV was bad with this shit. In time you reach the throne, it's time to throw down with Leon, but before swords can even clash, the Emperor makes a sudden return trip from hell and reclaims his palace, transforming it into Pandemonium, the palace of the underworld. This dude fucking overthrew the devil himself, took over hell, and came back to Earth to continue his conquest. He really liked that Behemoth. Another ding for the death count though, because Ricard sacrifices himself to allow our heroes to escape so that they can plan their final attack. Leon rejoins the group after not being around for like 20 hours, and through this Jade Passage, the gang managed to find a portal to Pandemonium, where they confront the Emperor one final time, and it goes down surprisingly quickly if you whack him with the blood sword 1 or 2 times. I also dig how I can just find Satan inside a treasure chest here. I guess if I was overthrown by someone so fragile, I want to hide in a treasure chest in shame too. Anyway, the Emperor is gone for good this time unless he one day takes over Super Hell. The world is finally saved, lots of people are dead, no dances this time. I don't think anyone wants to take that chance. So yeah, there's definitely more story here than previously, and that was the entire goal of the team. Use the last game to set up a foundation, start telling actual stories with the second game and beyond. Although compared to other entries, it's still a bit on the thin side in regards to the characters. Firion, Maria, Guy, and Leon, fuck it, I don't even count Leon because the game starts, you name him whatever you want, you get massacred by the soldiers, and then he doesn't join the party again until the end of the game, only reappearing very sporadically as the Dark Knight. Not much to go off there, but there also isn't much to go off for the others either. Now, compared to the Warriors of Light in Final Fantasy I, they actually do interact a couple of times with certain characters and events, but you can still count the number of times they do so with one hand. They're rebels with the cause but have little to no defining traits, and they don't interact with each other much. I mean, what, Firion is weak around women? I think so, given the one night stand he almost held the Lamia Queen. Maria is, I don't know, good at recognizing her brother's voice, and the only trait I got from Guy is that he can speak Beaver. It is such a minute thing that only matters one time in this very brief moment, but it was enough to stick out for me. And what the hell was that Beaver moment about anyway? There isn't much to salvage from these dudes unless you read the novelization. Yeah, Final Fantasy II had a novelization that was also Japanese exclusive, unsurprisingly. And while I didn't read the whole thing for this video, it apparently does a better job in establishing the heroes' and villains' personalities, though maybe some things were better left unsaid. Firion, for example, lost his parents sometime before the story begins. He was adopted by Maria's family before they were also killed by the Emperor. So okay, Firion and Maria are adoptive brother and sister, but Maria has a crush on Firion, and by the end of the book, they become an official couple. Ugh, that's a lot to unpack there. No thank you, I'll just stick with the game. Even the Emperor isn't that much of a character, he's more of an archetypical villain, but one that is clearly defined by his actions because while he doesn't have much in personality, he's still the cause of much grief that makes you want to punch him in the face, that's what you like in a villain. I personally like my villains to have more dimension, but sometimes all a bad guy needs to be a bad guy is to be an utter dick, and the Emperor fills that role maliciously. And just to be extra clear, while there is more of a plot here, it's still a straightforward dance. The difference here I find is that there's rhyme and reason to what you're doing and why you're doing it. The first game, restore the orbs. How'd you do that? Fuck if I know. Just do errands and hopefully something comes up. Elements are better established this go around. The Emperor's a douche, he's killing innocents, people are affected by this. You are affected by this. You can see that as clear as day. There are stakes. Yes, the first game had stakes in some regard, the elements going out of whack because of the fiends that was threatening life itself, but it felt that didn't really play into the progression of the story, strange as that sounds. The earth is rotting and the wind is dying, but what does that have to do with me mugging a pirate captain for their ship? There's cause and effect in Final Fantasy II, a linear progression where your next objective is influenced by what you did beforehand. The deck is heavily stacked against you, but the goal is clear cut, and your journey, while perilous, is getting you closer to your finish line. You just gotta keep pressing through. It is a very fundamental good versus evil storyline, one-dimensional you can even say. But I didn't mind it, if anything, because I wanted this prick to die with how much of an asshole he was. Seriously, so many people die. There's this sense of dread and hopelessness that permeates through the whole game. And not just from the events that transpire, the soundtrack is gloomy. The overworld theme, the song you'll likely hear the most, is probably the gloomiest overworld theme in the series, no, not counting the Meteor theme in 7 or the Mist theme in 9. This is a depressing Final Fantasy, I'd say one of the most depressing. The graphics may look as bright and colorful as Final Fantasy I, but man, that's just the front. Things are bad in this world, although the occasional bout of whiplash is bound to rear its ugly head.
Hooray! A corpse!
And in some way, I suppose this also leaks into the gameplay. So okay, I start the game up, you're immediately thrown into that battle against the Dark Knights, you get your ass handed to you, alright, shake it off, let's try that again. I got my mission objectives, but like my other ventures into a new world of Final Fantasy, one of the first things I always do is fight a few battles, get myself some gil and experience, and make a nice buffer for the journey ahead. I go ahead and kill some hornets here, huzzah, victory! I walk across the screen there, I get some gil, but I didn't get any experience points. My power went up, but there wasn't any experience points. Oh, this was that Final Fantasy. Before we get into that though, we should cover the fundamentals. Final Fantasy II's progression is not much different than before. Visiting towns and kingdoms to get new stuff, crawling through dungeons to get some MacGuffins, talking to NPCs to learn of new things and seeking out new destinations, a lot of similar beats, though this game has this quirky password system too. During certain dialogue, a word will be highlighted that you can choose to learn to add to your compendium. You can then use these words on any character to see if you get a reaction, like more elaboration on details, the next objective. And I didn't mind this system, but it quickly amounted to me just choosing every keyword I had to see what clicked. While it was more interactive, it ultimately felt like an added step to get information that was normally just told to you through basic dialogue. And keywords stick with you for the whole game too, so later on you're likely sifting through a bunch of words that no longer have any significance to get to the keywords that do matter. Final Fantasy II's combat is once again turn-based. You choose your character's actions like basic attacks or magical spells, and then watch things play out. You still have to take care of how you choose your targets for attacks because again, your characters can swing at an enemy that's already dead, and now there's also the matter of the row of the enemy. This was the first game to introduce the front and back row formations. Characters placed in the back row can't be hit by attacks unless they're long-ranged or magic-based, or if they're the last one standing, but this also holds true for enemies. You can't smack them with your sword if they're all the way back there. You gotta peel out the layers first, you get me? You want to keep your spell caches and long-range fighters in the back row at basically all times. Keeps them from getting annihilated with a well-aimed stare, but physical fighters should stay the hell away from the back row because unlike future games, physical fighters can't hit anything from the back, they can't even do half damage. And this isn't the end of the world, but it's something that kept happening to me throughout the game because whenever a character dies, and your characters will die a lot early on, they're automatically placed in the back row after being revived. And if you forgot to switch formations before heading into the next battle, and those characters don't have any other means of offense, whoops, they're a wet noodle now and practically worthless. You're better off trying to flee from the battle if the planets align and you're actually allowed to do so. I don't think I ran away from a battle more than 4 or 5 times in my entire playthrough. From what I understand, fleeing is tied to your agility, which levels up at random, but apparently the more evasion you have, the better your chance at increasing your agility becomes, and evasion is determined by the amount of attacks you're targeted by, and the type of equipment you have on. Am I getting that right? Either way, you gotta go out of your way to make it somewhat decent at all, but if you're not privy to those details, you are fighting most if not all encounters you run into in this game. But I didn't mind that too much. I don't like to run away from battles unless I absolutely need to, whether because I'm trying to save on resources or if I just want to get a move on. Normally, I like fighting when I can because I can use that extra gil and experience to create a buffer, as I said before. In Final Fantasy II, that's not quite how it works. You don't get traditional experience points here. Instead, your stats increase completely dependent on your actions. If you want to get stronger with the sword, you gotta keep swinging that sword, and that goes for any weapon type you want to be more proficient in. If you want more health, you gotta keep taking damage. More magic points, keep casting those spells. The more you use them, the better you will get at using them. You're increasing your proficiency, something nowadays you'd see in an Elder Scrolls title, or maybe even a Saga game. In fact, and as some of you noticed in the last video that completely skimmed over my mind then, one of the developers of this game and the last was Akitoshi Kawazu, the eventual creator of the Saga series. And in some way, you can look at Final Fantasy II as a prototype Saga game with how you affect your character's growth, the amount of freedom you have doing that, and the amount of freedom you have in this game's overworld. Compared to last time, the world of Final Fantasy II is one giant continent, so if you really wanted to, you could travel long distances on foot from the get-go and visit a lot of towns and other locales in any order you want. But well, if you do that, you're likely to run into extremely tough encounters that will rupture your asshole in 3 seconds flat for different reasons, and you have little to no heads up about that. Your curiosity can be your ultimate enemy in this overworld, and at a couple of times you'll be wishing you had a chocobo to avoid encounters altogether. Chocobos make their debut here. Giant horse birds that prevent random encounters are fast on the floor, but are awkward as hell to catch in this forest. But because of how stat building works here, even the most basic enemies have just as much significance as encounters you run into later, because your growth is not so much tied to the enemy you're facing, but rather your actions you perform in battle. And that has a lot of potential. It's easy to see how enticing that can be, especially to players who are completely down with micromanaging every last stat of their character. While Firion, Maria, and Guy are slightly skewed to be more proficient in a certain area, you are more than welcome to shape and mold them into whatever you want them to be. Have Firion be the well-balanced attacker, have Maria be the the all-powerful Red Mage and have Guy be the HP Sponge Lumberjack. Since there are no dedicated classes, this means new spells you can purchase in shops can be learned by anyone. And Final Fantasy II was the first game to bring in the magic point system. No more limited spell charges, you are free to cast any spell as often as you want, as long as you have the mana to spare. And there's still equipment you can use as items that cast spells to help save on resources. Get yourself something like the Evil Staff so you can use an all-powerful arrow spell on this Thunder Gigas. Wait, what? It targeted the Emperor. Ineffective. Yeah, the Emperor isn't even here. What the hell? So what, I use this staff and out in the distance, the Emperor's just chilling out in his seat, drinking tea, when he suddenly smacked in the face with a spell out of nowhere. Oh man, that is some good NES jank. Anyway, this can all work out. I admire the possibilities given, but here's why it falls flat to me. Assuming you're not cheating the system, more on that in a second, it can take an obnoxiously long time increasing your stats. For instance, if you want to increase a weapon's skill level from level 1 to level 2, this requires that you use that weapon about 100 times for each level. If you want to upgrade your magic spells, if you want your Fire 1 to become Fire 2, you have to use that magic spell a shitload of times. And keep in mind, your weapon and magic skills cap at 16. 16! Fire 1. Fire 2. Fire 16! Oh, why am I doing this indoors? Now, you absolutely do not need your magic to be at level 16 by the end game. Shit, my highest spell by the end, I think, was Berserk, which was around level 8 after liberal use, and I'm talking every other fucking battle. But to even be a proficient spellcaster, to make sure you have your ground covered with options that can make your journey easier, you gotta grind. Elemental coverage for multiple weaknesses, fire, ice, lightning, and arrow spells, party buffs like haste to hit more, berserk to hit stronger, protect for physical attacks, shell for magical attacks, blink for evasion. These all start at level 1 and need to be individually grinded to get them up to snuff. And you have to do that because a lot of these spells fucking suck at level 1, if they even work at all. They either do pitiful damage, have very insignificant gains, or just plain fucking miss, including essential spells like Esuna, the one spell that's supposed to help you heal status effects like stone, poison, paralysis. You have to grind the spell just to get it to work properly, and even at say level 5, in battle it can still fucking miss, and it's so infuriating. The life spell too, it just doesn't hit the target sometimes. How? They're a corpse, they ain't going anywhere, stop with this bullshit. There is just something that feels fundamentally wrong with me repeatedly casting spells like Esuna or Life on my party when they're not in need of it, all just to make it stronger. And I get the spirit of the mechanic, nobody's born a master, it takes practice, but this just feels fucking stupid. And some methods of leveling certain stats are also just plain fucking stupid. HP, for example, you want more of it, you gotta take damage. But since early encounters are more than happy to just run away from the battle, and as you begin leveling up your evasion by dodging attacks, enemies start to miss you altogether, meaning no damage, meaning no HP growth. So the best means of increasing your health is by attacking yourself. Yeah, just... Whether you're using weapons or if you want to speed things up and use that swap spell to really crank up the stat growth, you are often attacking yourself to get your stat growths on a consistent basis, and it's a viable strategy. Whether it was intentional or not, it works. You remember Super Android 17 in Dragon Ball GT, how he deliberately took damage to make himself stronger? It's like that, only I'm doing that shit to myself. Who punches themselves to get stronger? I'm spamming these moves, and at some point I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? And I know a part of it is simply because I played so many other Final Fantasies that don't have this sort of leveling system. And you know, this is the second game, it's an experimental time for the series, seeing what works and what doesn't. This is what defines Final Fantasy II, what makes it the game it is, a defining characteristic that will make or break the game for you in more ways than one. If you're leveling your stats as intended, you're in for the long ride, but there is a glitch in the original Famicom and Origins release that lets you rapidly build your stats by simply selecting an enemy with the thing you want to level up, and then canceling the action, and then doing the action again, and then repeating ad nauseum. You keep doing this and you'll be building those stats much faster than intended, but let's face it, that's still 10 minutes of watching your characters go forward and back, and then forward and back, and then go forward and back, then put one foot forward. I don't know, man, it just feels broken, but given the rest of the game, building stats is a necessity regardless. It's a combination of a few things. The types of enemies you face, the number of enemies you face, and these fucking dungeons. Mother of God, Final Fantasy II has some of the most long-winded dungeons I've ever experienced in an old RPG. They just keep going going and going. So many floors with high encounter rates, and a bunch of these fake doors leading to dead ends with a guaranteed encounter. And I can't stress enough how much the game fucking spams these. It's so artificial. Why do all these places have fake rooms? These dungeons were phenomenal and continuously draining my resources, and this is before they started adding save and restoration points in later games, so most of the time you're expecting to do these in one fell swoop, or else you're backtracking out or using an exit spell, restocking your supplies, or selling shit you don't need anymore because your inventory filled up again and you need room for the other treasure. I don't get this. Items stacked in the original game, but here everything is counted individually, so shit fills up fast and key items once again share the same space as regular items. Why is it like this? And then you have the encounters. The difficulty of Final Fantasy II can feel like a fucking seesaw. You're either too powerful for the normal fodder, or you get decimated in 3 or less turns. Status magic is the bane of my existence in this game. I had a battle that lasted no more than 5 seconds because I was ambushed, and the first thing the enemy did was a party-wide petrified. Just like that, game over, and there was nothing I could do about that. Without increasing your agility and evasion, this can happen a lot, and sometimes it can be from something innocent, like a treasure chest, because yes, Final Fantasy II was also the first game to introduce the monster in a box, like the one inside the Dreadnought. No, I guess I didn't really need that ice shield, but thanks for pushing my shit in anyway, punishing my curiosity, you pricks. Now, in my experience, because I made it a thing to fight everything that I came across, whether I wanted to or not, because I was eventually dodging attacks left and right, spending 2 to 4 sessions doing nothing but grinding my spells and weapon skills, with my stats naturally evolving because of it, I would start dodging almost everything enemies threw at me. Physical attacks, magic attacks, it would all miss, and I won't lie, I felt fucking invincible. I was like Luke Skywalker towards the end of The Last Jedi, not giving a fuck. The grinding was paying off, and I'm glad I was able to see that it was. But then I get to the bosses, and I don't know if their defenses are overtuned to hell, but suddenly my triple-digit attacks are now doing low double-digit numbers, or not doing any damage at all, which is normally the case with my 4th character. Your 4th character slot is constantly changing throughout the adventure because of story progression, and it gets to a point where you wonder, man, is it even worth grinding these characters up or giving them spells to level up if they're just gonna leave the party soon anyway? Most of the time I didn't bother, I'll just let them get whatever they can during dungeon runs, but this fucks me during boss fights because they're usually the first to go down. But again, even my heavy hitters are doing smaller numbers overall even after all that grinding. What the hell are these bosses made of? Bricks? What are these damage rolls? I had to hope that I leveled up the appropriate elemental spell to lay on some damage in some capacity, assuming they were even weak to a certain element, and that I had enough mana left to do so considering how spent I was at the end of some of these dungeons. Although to be fair, money was eventually a non-issue, selling extra spell tomes and equipment that I didn't need, so I was able to stock up on elixirs for a full restore, and they certainly came in handy. But after a while I noticed my strategies are getting kind of Final Fantasy 1, because the best method for taking care of these guys was good old-fashioned blunt force trauma. Horsepower, heavy-duty cast iron power-driving attacks that hurt so much they'll rattle the boss's ancestors. Every time I hit them with the shot, it's like they tried kissing the express train. Yeah! Haste and Berserk strats. Casting Berserk to buff my attack power, and casting Haste to increase my number of hits. Essentially increasing my attack power, so Haste and Berserk are kind of redundant in some sense, but whatever. It was working. Furion and Guy were thrashing everything as long as they didn't straight up miss. Because it got me results, I spent a good hour maxing out the preferred weapon stats, and now I was doing quadruple numbers on everything. It was overkill, but considering how long these dungeons were getting, how I didn't want to risk spending more than 20 seconds with assholes that could still end my life very quickly with a proper status spell, I just wanted to get things over with, and that's normally not a good sign with me when I just want things to end. I just can't get down with the game on a structural basis, despite it being the game to introduce a lot of mainstays, like the front and back row formations, the magic point system for spells, how you could select multiple targets with spells both inside and outside of battle. Before, only certain attacks could multi-target. That wasn't the case anymore. There was the Chocobo for ground travel without the fear of encounters, classic enemies like Flans, the physical sponges, bombs, which were exactly what they sounded like, Marlboros, which can throw every status effect on you with their breath, the Behemoth, oh I love the Behemoth, one of my favorite monsters in RPGs when they aren't cucking me with meteors. It was the first game to have proper boss music for strong encounters, the first game to have the monster in the box. I cannot deny that Final Fantasy II laid the groundwork that would soon become tradition. All these things except the leveling system. This is the only game to have it to my knowledge, and I feel that's for good reason. And look, there's a chance you can get some enjoyment out of it. If you're all about the grind and number crunching, fuck it. That's Final Fantasy II's entire modus operandi. But there's simply too much of it, and if there's a way of playing this that doesn't require smacking my face for a few hours or casting spells for no reason just to make them more accurate or more powerful, I don't see it, and I don't feel like spending any more energy on it. I can't say this for myself, but I hear the version on Origins and Dawn of Souls makes the grind less tedious. But if Clement's video on this subject is anything to go by, maybe not that much. There's still the overly long dungeons, the high encounter rate, the fake rooms, and the copious amounts of forward and back, and then forward and back, and then go forward and back, and put one foot forward. If you have the time, you should really give his Final Fantasy retrospective a look at, because there's another guy who grew up with the series, and the amount of heart and soul he poured into these videos is pretty obvious. I don't think any of my videos will go over an hour, but considering we're on the second game and this video is about as long as the previous one, fuck it, who knows?
Will anything ever top my Sonic 06 video? Either way, I'll catch you guys in the next video. This one's going to be a bit because the original Final Fantasy III is up next, and I want to spend time on both the NES game and the DS remake, so I'll likely have another round 2 in the docket to fill the time, maybe something else as well. Plus I got some updates heading your way. It's going to put things on hold for just a little bit, so stay tuned for that, get all the deets then and there. As always, thank you all for watching. Stay safe, wash your hands, wear a mask if you decide to go outside, get vaccinated if it's possible. Have yourselves a fantastic night, and take care. Did I do the salute twice? I don't know. It's getting kind of hard to, remember this whole sign off, especially with, it seems to get longer the more videos I do. Have a good night.